Good morning, everybody. Time for us to go ahead and begin. Thank you guys for being here. Appreciate you, all of our guests here this morning. Let's go ahead and begin with our typical rundown of what we do here. So this is a little different than a lot of our Bible classes. For a lot of you who've been in here, this is our next to last class of this quarter, actually. But what we do, we teach. I have some things to say. We have discussion. We introduce spiritual practice. You guys go home and you work on that during the week, and then we come back and we reflect on that together in community. And I will go ahead and say there will be at the beginning and toward the end, there'll be some discussion time, 5, 10, 12 minutes in there. So if you're at a table by yourself, it's probably best to join up with somebody else at the table so you can better experience that discussion. All right, we're working with Practicing the Way, the book. This is what this class is titled after. Just to review, last week we talked about transformation is possible, but it's not inevitable. We talked about creating a rule of life and how having a rule of life is like that trellis, like a lattice work in which our spirituality can grow. We need an intentional plan for our spiritual formation, what the early Christians called a rule of life. A rule of life is a schedule and a set of practices and relational rhythms that create space for us to be with Jesus, become like him, and do as he did. When crafting a rule of life for the first time, it's important to start small, begin with subtraction, not addition. All right, so as we talked about that, let's go ahead and jump in here. We normally open this up for discussion here as a group, but what I want to do is ask you at your tables here, y'all discuss this yourselves. Take a few minutes and just look at these 3 questions. Take about 5 minutes or so and just talk about whichever one of these questions resonates with you. Share about your process of creating a rule of life. What worked for you? This is what we worked on last week. What feelings came up for you as you worked through this exercise? And what do you anticipate will be the most life-giving and transformative practice you came up with? Okay? Talk about that for a few minutes.
Happening something this week. Open the office door, what was Lynn and Maywork, and go in there in the back and get a printer off the sermon. There's 3 pages. The front says the power of prayer, which is board, and then just put that in the hallway tray.
Very good, guys. Thank y'all so much for that. I hope that was fruitful. And thank you for doing that. Now we'll go ahead and shift into our lesson for today. Jonathan, would you mind turning off these front lights for me just for a second? I'm about to show a short video clip here. It's only about 45 seconds long, I think.
There's an ancient proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. From time immemorial, teachers of the way of Jesus have likened apprenticeship to a kind of spiritual journey. A long, winding journey of becoming a person of love in God. And like the proverb says, it is a journey that we were designed to go on together in community.
Here we go. All right. So you are not meant to go on this journey alone. You are meant to follow Jesus in community. And that's what we're talking about today. The final practice we're talking about is living in community. By community, we mean church, but the word church often has different connotations and even some baggage. So community might get the word, might get the idea across a little better. Just to review, we actually started out, this is the first text we covered in this class when Jesus called his apostles. Jesus said to them, "Follow me, I will make you become fishers of men." And immediately they left their nets and followed him. Now, Jesus, I want to point out here, did not call an apprentice. Peter, James, and John, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, and the rest of them, Matthew, Levi, and all those. He called apprentices. So you became an apprentice to Jesus. What that also meant was you became part of this community of other apprentices. And there's no taking one over the other. You couldn't pick, I just want Jesus, I don't want these other guys. They come with the package. You can't say, I like Jesus, I don't like Peter. Well, I'm sorry, Peter's here too. You know, you got to deal with Peter just like you deal with the rest of them. They are inseparable. In Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Jesus and the disciples are like always together. Except that one time they denied and ran off. But they are together the rest of the time. In fact, this was one of the purposes Jesus had apostles. Mark actually tells us this. He went up on the mountain and called to him those whom he desired, and they came to him. And he appointed 12 whom he also named apostles, so that they might be with him. And then he goes on to say they might cast out demons and things like that. But notice there he's saying they might be with him. Part of the purpose of Jesus calling these apostles was to have people with him. He wanted a community. Why did he call 12? Anybody know? Any idea about that? Why 12? Why not 21? You know? Why not 30? Don't keep the answers to yourself. What is it, Lynn?
Cheaper by the dozen.
Cheaper by the dozen. Okay, all right. Could be, perhaps. This is, what's that? Yeah, the 12 tribes of Israel. This is a highly symbolic act. Jesus is saying, I'm making a new community of God, a new people of God. The 12 tribes of Israel were the foundation of, well, they were Israel, the nation of Israel. So by choosing 12 guys, he's saying, I'm making a new Israel. Really, he's making a new family by calling these 12 disciples to himself. So we call this, in fact, Paul calls it in Ephesians, the foundation of the church is the apostles. The foundation of the church. Church is not an event. You know, we do church, we go to church, things like that. We know hopefully we know church is a family. It's the relationships, the community we have with one another. That's what this is getting at. In that same chapter, Mark 3, Jesus goes on to say, the narrative goes on to say, a crowd was sitting around and they said to him, your mother and your brothers are outside seeking you. He answered them, who are my mother and my brothers? And looking about at those who sat around him, he said, here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and sister and mother. Okay, brethren. It's the Greek word autophoi to mean brothers or sisters, brothers and sisters. It's the word for sibling. So brethren in the Bible is the word sibling. It's a family term. In fact, Paul uses this word, autophoi, over 130 times. So we mentioned several weeks ago, the word Christian is used 3 times in the New Testament? And the word disciple is used, 290 times in the New Testament? Way more. This is another word that's used almost to that same frequency. We are a family. This is a big part of who we are as a family. In fact, you go to the New Testament, adoption is a big idea. We are adopted as sons and daughters into God's family. That's a big part of our identity in Christ. If you listen to Paul, especially in Galatians. To be a disciple, then, is to be part of a new family. So what this means, why am I bringing this up? You're thinking, we kind of know this, Matthew. This is kind of church 101. We know this kind of stuff. Well, do we, with our spiritual formation, do we know this? Because Jesus' desire is not just to make you a person of love. When we talk about spiritual formation, we often think about me. I am being formed. I want Jesus to make me into a person of love. The fact is, however, Jesus wants to make us a community of love. So if we are family, if that is a big part of our identity as apprentices, if you can't be an apprentice by yourself, you just do. It's not that you need them. You have apprentices with you. What that means then is spiritual formation is not a private exercise. It's not something just between you and the Lord. It is something we all do together as a family. Okay? You can't follow Jesus alone. It's not a matter of should I follow Jesus. You can't. It is impossible. You never see in the Bible a singular disciple by himself, without Jesus, without other people. You just don't see it. Okay? And so and think about it this way. Jesus said, the teacher came to him, what's the greatest commandment? Jesus said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and your mind. This is the great first commandment. The second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So if this is like what the law and the prophets hang on, as Jesus said, loving God and loving neighbor, it really makes no sense that you could be a disciple without people around you to love, right? That makes sense? Y'all with me? Okay. All right. Here's a good quote from Joseph Hellerman, who wrote a lot about community, the church as a family. His book, When the Church Was a Family. Spiritual formation occurs primarily in the context of community. Persons who remain contented with their brothers and sisters in the local church almost invariably grow in self-understanding. And they mature in their ability to relate in healthy ways to God and to their fellow human beings. This is especially the case for those courageous Christians who stick it out through the often messy process of interpersonal discord and conflict resolution. Long-term interpersonal relationships are the crucible of genuine progress in the Christian life. Listen to this now. People who stay grow. People who leave do not grow. Why don't you take a minute and respond to that? What thoughts come to mind to you about that quote? Any pushback? Y'all agree? Agree? All right. Thank you. I agree too. That's why church is essential. When I say church, I don't just mean Sunday worship. Right? I've known people, as you have, who kind of hop from one situation to another. right? And I'm not saying it's never the right thing to move from one church to another church, aside from your physically geographical moving. Sometimes it's needed. There are reasons for that, but sometimes I've seen it. Somebody just, I don't like these people. I want to find some people I like. That's an immature Christian. Okay. I have another video. This is a little longer that I want to show you here.
There is a growing body of research from the social sciences that groups relationships into different categories based on group size and the depth of vulnerability. One of the most widely accepted paradigms is from Dr. Robin Dunbar of Oxford. It's called Dunbar's number. He calls our inner circle our intimates. This is 1 to 5 people max, who deeply know us as we are, our shadow and our light, and who, ideally, love us as we are. Of course, many in the West have no intimates, the fallout of Western individualism and the breakdown of the family. But hopefully, you have a few people you can bare your soul to, a spouse or best friend or mentor. The next circle is our friends, which goes up to 15 people. This is the people we do life with. We practice the one another's of the New Testament. We help each other move, we go on vacation together, we share meals, we drop off groceries when people are sick. This is our community. The next threshold is around the 150 person mark. Sociologists call this the law of 150, as 150 is about the maximum number of people we can be in relationship with, and it's the optimal group size for human organization. While there are some very large churches, this is also about the size of most local churches. And we draw on this wider social network for all sorts of things. This is our village, per se. The final circle is our tribe, the larger group we identify with and belong to. We don't know all these people personally, but this group is where we get a vision of life and a call to live with meaning and purpose. For many in the secular world, this could be a company or political party or a sports team. For us as followers of Jesus, this is the Church of Jesus. And when it comes to our spiritual formation, we need relationships across all 4 circles. Jesus had relationships at every layer. He had 3 intimates, Peter, James, and John. He had the 12 and a few close friends like Mary and Martha. Then he had the group of 120 in Jerusalem. Then the larger church that he left behind. Healthy people have relationships in all 4 circles. But our deepest formation, growth, healing, and change all happens in the smaller circles. We all need what Celtic Christians called an anam cara, or a soul friend, to bear our most vulnerable burdens with. C.S. Lewis once said the essence of friendship can be summed up in the phrase, "You too?" Meaning friends come together around a shared joy like backpacking or surfing or reading fiction. In a spiritual friendship, the shared joy is Jesus. And we need a community to do life with. We were created to live deeply relational lives. And it's in the first 2 circles of our closest community that we experience deep, lasting transformation.
Thank you all's patience as I'm managing my own live stream over here. So I'm doing some fancy computer work for someone who's not so fancy computer minded. Okay. All right. That made a lot of sense for me. Did that video make a lot of sense for y'all? Like, I was kind of surprised to know this is actually a sociological thing, and it's in the Bible. Get my camera queued up with me. It's in the Bible. Jesus had those relationships. So we need those relationships, yet we all have mixed feelings about these kind of relationships, don't we? Most of us do. So he's arguing, and sociology argues, and the pattern of the Bible argues, you need those intimates, your Peter, James, and John. You need your friends, your 12. Most of those broader ones, we have all those. We have our tribe. Everybody's got a tribe. We have our village, our church. Our church is almost our tribe, based on those numbers it gives there. Where we often need more is with our friends in those incidents. That's hard sometimes, though. We want, the tension we have is that we want connection, but connection terrifies us. Y'all agree with that? I want connection. I'm so scared to have connection. Maybe it's because you've been hurt before. Human relationships are the things that wound us more than anything. And they're also the things that heal us, aren't they? But it's hard. It's scary. And I get that totally. Here's a quote for you. Our deepest wounds come from our relationships, but so do our deepest healings. So once again, like we talked about the rule of life, like we talked about all these practices, they're not just going to fall in our lap. Friendships do not just fall into our laps. Like they did when you're in first grade and you just go play on the jungle gym. It's harder as you get older. You've got to work on those things. And here are 3 aspects of spiritual friendships that we need. So what I'm about to tell you then, if you want that connection, these are 3 elements you're going to have to employ with your friends. The first is depth. Okay? Spiritual friendship, those intimates he's talking about, these are not just, hi, how are you? How the sports team do Saturday? How's the weather doing up there? You kind of jab each other, you're joking around. It's kind of surface level stuff. Friends talk about that. Your village talks about that. It's fine. But for intimates, it's got to go deeper. It's got to be really what's going on inside me. Here are my fears. Here's my sin. Here's what I'm struggling with. Here are the deepest joys of my life. That kind of stuff. It's got to have depth or it won't be close. All right? The second thing it needs is vulnerability. We come together around our weakness. It is those things that we share that's what that opens the door for that intimacy. Really what opens the door to that depth. So we are raw, we're honest with each other, we're transparent. And this is really, as Jesus talked about, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It's the spiritual poverty that we can acknowledge to one another. I really don't have it together, actually. You might think this about me, but here's the real me. That's vulnerability. There's depth and there's vulnerability. There are 2 parts to vulnerability. Telling the truth. We've talked about these things before, which is confession. So you're honest with one another. You confess things to one another. Confess your sins to one another. And pray for one another. The other side of that, though, is listening. Like real deep, honest listening to one another. Where you listen not just to say, okay, let me find a thing I can jab here and say, but you listen to hear, not listen to speak. The third aspect of this is commitment to transformation. Now, a lot of us reach a certain level in our maturity in various ways, physically, I guess, emotionally, spiritually, it's certainly true, that we top out. We hit this wall, we plateau. And in our friendships, it can be that way too. So these kind of spiritual friendships, this is the accountability part of it. Where you are committing to continued transformation. You're not just like, let's just keep the status quo. You want to grow. And this person is the person who can kind of tell you stuff. Here's a thought to consider. So David had this sin with Bathsheba where his life went off the rails, right? Y'all know who he had in his life earlier when he was going through some real bad things? He had Jonathan in his life, didn't he? I wonder, Jonathan died, I wonder if David had found another Jonathan. Would David and Bathsheba even happen? Maybe not. It's fun to think about. Maybe not. He'd have somebody there watching out for him. But he's alone, he's isolated, and he falls in the sea. There's something to that. It is possible to go to church every Sunday of your whole life and never have these kinds of relationships. Right? We all know this. We go to church looking for these relationships, but we don't find them. Either because we're not the ones who want to be vulnerable and share, or nobody else does, or you do it and it's not reciprocated. Both those happen. You can even go to small groups every other Sunday and not have these kind of friendships. Most of our small groups are too big anyway for the intimate group to be a part of that. But it doesn't happen around the stage, it happens around the table. Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote this book about the church, Life Together. I highly recommend it. He said, those who love their dream of a Christian community more than they love the Christian community itself become destroyers of that Christian community, even though their personal intentions may be ever so honest, earnest, and sacrificial. Ooh, that's a tough one, isn't it? Well, here's what he's saying. You know how there are some young people who are in love with the idea of love? Right? You know, those young, they just love being in love, Doesn't who they're in love with, it doesn't even matter, They just love being in love. There are some people some Christians who are in love with the idea of church. This idea of the ideal church. The fact is, those of you who've been in it, who've been through this, church can be one of the most hurtful, harmful, damaging places for your soul. But it can also be the absolute best place for your soul. It's both of them. Both of those things can happen. Okay? We've got to be the ones to step out there. I hear this all last week. I was talking to somebody and heard this, and there's this conflict of feelings here. I want to connect. I'm excited about this church. I want to connect and be part of this. Okay, well, here's some opportunities for you. Here's some ways to share. Here's some places. Well, I'm a kind of private person, though. What happens time and time again is that those desires in the community are never met because we're so private. Okay? All right. Okay. Before we go to the group discussion, any questions or comments you want to say here? Has this conversation sparked any thoughts that you want to share right now? Brenda.
The more you participate, you become closer to the group.
Yeah, that's true. The more present you are, the more you participate. You got to invest yourself.
Giving me bad
They're giving you a bad time, Brenda.
Do you believe that?
Yeah. They're just reciprocating, Brenda. Okay, you're giving it, they're giving it back. All right. So let's spend a few minutes talking about these questions here. Of the 3 relational characteristics named, here's the first one: depth, vulnerability, and commitment to transformation. Which is the hardest for you? Y'all talk about this at your tables for a few minutes. Which is the hardest for you? to wrap up here this last little section. The classes are dismissing and everything. I apologize for running a little late here. But the spiritual practice this week, and we'll talk about this Wednesday in our midweek class too, is living together in community. And this is not a hard one. Well, it is hard in a lot of ways. But this is not a new one, I should say. We know the concept pretty well. So Jesus called a community isn't a theory or an idea, it's a practice. It's a relational way of doing life together. Now, Jesus himself preached to crowds of thousands, but he spent most of his time with Peter, Andrew, James, and John, the 12. Peter, James, and John, 12. In their homes and around tables. One more quote for you, Frederick Buechner. You can survive on your own. You can grow strong on your own. You can prevail on your own. But you cannot become human on your own. So what we got to do, we're in the church, we're at church this morning, right? But let's be the church to one another. Find your Peter, Andrew, James, and John. Find your 12. Who are your 12? Who is your Peter, James, and John? That's our task of our next task in spiritual formation. So identify your community. Find those people, or begin the process of finding those people. Begin to meet with them regularly. I would say a good place to start. Okay, we're doing this stuff now. Small groups, they just launched. If you're not in a small group, Heartfelt Moms, Wednesday night men's class, okay, which is kind of it's men's class. It's a good place to start, okay? I don't know what to say about that one. There's a ladies class on Wednesday night too. Thank you for that. So, I was going to say men's class is kind of the equivalent to Heartfelt Moms, but it's not at all the equivalent to Heartfelt Moms. But in these groups, when you go to these groups now, okay, hey, today we got an opportunity. A lot of y'all are in small groups, I know. Today you got an opportunity. Will you be deep? Will you be vulnerable? Will you commit to transformation in that group? All right, so just to review, Jesus' invitation was to come and do life together. Through Jesus, we've been adopted into the family of God. His desire is not just to form you into a person of love, but to form a community of love. You can't follow Jesus alone. Spiritual formation is a relational process. And there are 4 layers of community that we talked about. Intimates, the friends, the village, and the tribe. All those layers. Spiritual friendships are marked by those 3 core characteristics: depth, vulnerability, commitment to transformation. Our final practice is to cultivate a community of spiritual friendship and begin meeting regularly. All right, so let's do that next week. We'll come back here. Next week will be the last Sunday. The last Sunday of the summer shakeup. So this will be our last meeting next week. We're going to be reviewing a lot of the stuff and talking about all the things we talked about. Okay? But if you want to meet with us Wednesday night, we'll be talking about community, living together Wednesday. Ask it, we always in the same way. Church, do you want to become like Jesus? Yes. Then let's get to work apprenticing Jesus. Let's close with this prayer. Feel free to pray this out loud with me if you want to. Lord and Father, there is no greater prayer than yours. Make us one as you are, in devotion, in living, in love. In Jesus' name, amen. You are dismissed. Thank you.